Good evening, everyone. Welcome again on a Wednesday evening. My name is Rich Pertell, Libertarian Party of New York, Legislative Affairs Subcommittee Chair. We have a special event going on tonight to discuss power in New York, stimulated by the recent event to pass legislation to mandate electric cars by 2035, but we want to go way beyond that, talk about local issues, other state issues related to power consumption and storage and so on. Just a kind of a broad topic like we did a couple weeks ago about the issues with the recycling and the Jones Act and state policy on that. Go back and look for that video too. That was interesting. So with us tonight, we have Cody Anderson. If you wave your hand there, Cody. If his video's frozen again, his video might be frozen again. Can you speak, Cody?
I can speak. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, he's having intermittent video issues, so it might be an audio feed most of the time from Cody. But Cody is current serving chair of the LPNY, and he'll be teaming up with Mark Brayman. If Mark could wave, there he is. Mark is a retired professor from Syracuse University, taught chemistry pretty much your whole career, right? And he owns a Tesla electric car, so he has a firsthand knowledge on that issue. And then the upper right panel is Tom Queter, chair of Chenango County, ran for New York State Senate 52 last year, and he's had some extensive dealings with siting boards and problems in local government with trying to build wind power in particular in his county. So we'll segue into that last. And in the center, my name is again Rich Pertell. I'll kind of talk about the bigger issues of the statewide issue of power consumption and power storage, and how some of this might play into the problems that Tom sees locally, and maybe there'll be some redundancy we could talk about when we get done speaking about electric vehicle technology. So first up, then Cody and Mark. We didn't flip a coin to see who'll go first, but you guys can kind of back and forth on what's this legislation mean, and how's it going to impact the average New Yorker? What's it really going to do for us?
Mark, may I?
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. just as a general policy statement, this is just another mandate from New York State, and largely it's a mandate that's going to fall on the shoulders of the taxpayers or the car buying public to foot the bill. We believe that energy consumption should be a matter of choice, whether it's solar or wind power, or gas or oil, some kind of fossil fuel, or even nuclear. We think that energy policy should be diverse, and we believe it should be a matter of consumer choice and not mandated by the state. And that's all I'll say from a policy perspective. I'll cede to Mark because he's a lot more wonky on the practical aspects. He is an electric car owner, and he enjoys his car, and I think he sees it as part of a bigger picture. Mark, go ahead.
Well, so part of the big picture is that I have been, for my entire career, studying energy conversion in biological systems and in chemical systems. I wrote my PhD on a biological solar energy converting system that doesn't involve chlorophyll, and there had been back then, and still has been, a little bit of talk about trying to harness that system, which is called bacteriorhodopsin, and more recently its relative called proteorhodopsin. I've published numerous papers on those proteins, and have given a great deal of thought to what it takes to implement use of solar energy from the biosphere. I also have more recently published several papers and obtained a patent on a method for extracting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and converting it chemically using artificial photosynthesis. So I have a lot of background in this, and I'm particularly interested in rooting out charlatans, okay? Because there's a lot of people who both in science and in politics want to use buzzwords to gain credit for, well, as Rich has said, virtue signaling, and they are proposing things that may not be actually practical at all. So one experience that I've had as a Tesla owner is that New York State legally only allows, I think, 6 or 7 Tesla dealerships in the entire state, because Tesla has adopted a model of direct-to-consumer sales. So Tesla has been trying for at least 3 years. I remember they tried to enlist potential people on the waiting list for purchasing in March of 2018. When I was on the waiting list to buy a Tesla, they tried to enlist me to help lobby the state legislature in New York to increase the number of places where you could buy Teslas using their direct-to-consumer model. And they never succeeded in getting a site where you can buy them upstate north of Westchester County. All of the sites where you can buy are down there. So I picked up my Tesla in December 2018 in Mount Kisco, New York, which is the closest place to actually acquire a Tesla in New York State. So this whole idea of saying that we're only going to have electric vehicle car sales, no other, no traditional car sales by 14 years from now, to me is an example of charlatanism at its worst, because the legislature is not solving the practical problem of how to put these electrical vehicles in people's hands. They are setting down a mandate and a marker, which is going to end up squeezing suppliers, traditional car dealers, and a lot of other people, and making their lives miserable, while not effectively achieving anything really all that useful. Should we go back? Cody, do you have other things to add to that?
I agree. I hear everything you've said. How's that? No, it's all very true, and there's big promises of big promises of being of environmental good, while meantime, we have to mine lithium for all these batteries, and so long as it's not happening here in our backyard, it's happening someplace else, whether it's in South America or China. It's causing great environmental damage that may not be, the carbon emissions that everybody's talking about, but it's still causing significant environmental distress. So I would just put that out there. And I think Rich is putting up an article from Wired magazine that I had pointed out earlier, regarding the environmental cost of lithium mining. If you look at some of the places where lithium is being mined, they've essentially left barren wastelands of landscapes. So you can say you're solving the carbon problem, but you're causing other problems. And to increase, as Mark was saying earlier before our call, before our broadcast here, you're basically increasing electric cars from 2% to 100% of the market in some place like New York, and you're greatly increasing the environmental damage being done by lithium mining. You also have the disposal problem. What do you do with all these batteries that only have a certain useful life? How do you dispose of the stuff? You can recycle a certain amount of the raw materials that go into the batteries, but there's a lot of other materials that cannot be recycled. What do you do with them? And I think Tom will be able to talk to that. They were talking about putting a battery recycling plant or disposal facility. What was the euphemism for it, Tom? What did they call it?
Well, they called it recycling. We called it incinerating.
Right, which is essentially what it is. But they're putting one in his district, and one of the big pillars of his campaign was what is the, it's fine to get the business, but what is the environmental impact to our area by having this facility here? So there's more than just the carbon emissions we have to look at. If you're really concerned about the environment, you have to look at the acquisition of the raw materials and disposal of the leftovers.
If I can add to that, the unfortunate thing about our current environmentalism that we see is kind of just what Cody pointed out. They latch right onto that carbon, and they leave out everything else that's detrimental.
So the other thing that has become very obvious to me about the legislature not really planning things well is that there's a disconnect between the people that are going to be forced to have to deal with these mandates, which are mainly people who live upstate New York or people who drive for a living through upstate New York. And there has been very little provision for the kind of driving that those people do. Now, as a commuter, I will say that electric vehicles have solved the commuting problem. Okay, I live in Cazenovia, about 17 miles from Syracuse University, and driving an electric vehicle is pretty much a perfect solution for me. I can charge it at home at night, where the costs per kilowatt hour are about 11 cents, including both the energy cost and the transmission cost. So 11 cents a kilowatt hour, that's a little less than half of the cheapest that I can get at a fast charging station that Tesla runs. So Tesla charges closer to the range of 25 cents per kilowatt hour to use one of their superchargers. And they don't even have any of those kinds of charging stations at rest areas on the thruway right now. I started pushing for that, speaking both to Senator Rachel May 2 years ago when she first held hearings on the Climate and Community Protection Act. Actually wrote a critique of the need to include those in planning. And so that's in the public record somewhere. I also, have done calculations on what truck drivers are going to have to do. The amount of energy that truck drivers will need to have to drive their vehicles 200 miles is a phenomenal amount of energy. And to force those truck drivers to leave the thruway and go to the nearby Tesla superchargers is incredibly inefficient. They need to add to be planning right now for truck drivers of all sizes, from pickup truck sizes to semis. They need to plan for them to be able to charge those vehicles at thruway rest areas or other, by the interstate stops, so that those vehicles don't have to pull completely off the road and go to a charging facility that's private. And as far as I can tell, there's been no successful implementation of that. We still, 2 years after I made those comments, we still have no charging stations at any thruway rest areas along Interstate 90 portion of the thruway. There are a couple slow charging stations on the Interstate 87 portion of the thruway, but I've heard tell and experienced that they don't work very well. And it would take to charge enough from what I understand Tesla's current plans for semi tractor trailer batteries that will be upwards of 1,000 kilowatt hour batteries. To charge those right now using the existing two chargers that are along the side of Interstate 87 at rest areas, that would be a 48-hour charging operation right now. It's insane that there has been so little progress on this. There's a disconnect, I believe, between what the legislature wants and aspires to, and what really is happening and is possible. It doesn't bode well. This is not going to end well right now. This 14-year-old plan will. I'm very skeptical that it will work. It could work. It could work in theory. I mean, as a scientist, I'm an optimist. There is really no absolute scientific or technical barrier to making this work, but the incentives are not correct. This state does very little to attract private investment properly, and that's what you need to do. You need a lot more investment than this state has right now in its public coffers.
Mark, what do you? I know you've brought up before the issue of the fuel tax, which is supposed to be a user fee. if we shift all this these cars over from fuel to from gasoline and diesel over to electric, and there is no fuel tax. Has this been discussed enough? I mean, what's going to happen when all these electric cars are on the road and they're not really paying a fuel tax for funding of the road operations and maintenance? Has that been talked about enough? Are we going to end up getting far many more cars on the road, electric cars on the road, and then find out that we're not funding our highways enough?
Well, we know we're not funding our infrastructure enough.
So, gasoline. Yeah.
So the question is part of it is that I'm a little concerned that libertarians are a little too doctrinaire on some aspects of this issue. I do think that we need to get rid of existing mechanisms for funding highways using pump-based fuel taxes, which only apply to gasoline and diesel. And I never use a fuel pump to run my Tesla. I only use the grid at home, and I can go 200 or 300 miles on about $4 worth of home charging. So, but part of the reason that I can go so far on a home charge is I'm not paying any taxes for the use of those roads that I drive on. Conversely, farm vehicles like well, Tom can tell me if I get any of these right, but even like the John Deere rider mower that I uses plenty of gasoline, and I pay road taxes for that, but that has never been on a highway. So I as a very small scale mower have to pay taxes for myself and other Tesla drivers to be on the road. Now, is that fair? Okay, and we're approaching a point where again, as Rich pointed out, if there's a big increase in the number of electric vehicles, the burden for paying for highways will fall much more unfairly on upstate farmers, truckers, etc., who pay the pump taxes and cannot really substitute electric vehicles for the kind of work that they do. And that's intrinsically unfair. I happen to believe that we would be able to achieve a fairer state by applying a broad-based carbon tax, which would end up then applying also to electric vehicle owners who would have to pay that carbon tax through their electric utility bills because the electric utilities are currently using carbon sources. It's a temporary solution, but it might get enough political support from the climate hawks or the climate support, the people who are concerned about climate, as well as people who are concerned about tax fairness, that we could do that. The other solutions that I've heard for including electric vehicles in the payment of road maintenance and building have been really pretty scary. They include things like putting trackers in cars or using the Easy Pass trackers to track how much usage people make of highways. Now, I use my Easy Pass, but of the 60,000 miles that I have on my Tesla in the past 2 years, only probably about 1,000, 2,000 miles were on the thruway, and so only a very small portion of my road usage has been captured. Again, as I say, I'm a commuter, and I use mostly town and county roads to get to Syracuse University, mostly along, let's say, State Route 92, and there's no tracking right now. So we would either have to consider building a whole series of tracking stations to figure out who uses their car where and when. That it does not sound very libertarian appealing to me. The other solution that I have heard someone suggest is to jack up fees for annual renewals of registrations, and that has a certain amount of appeal. It certainly will capture some funding from electric vehicles. However, it doesn't really represent the actual usage. So there are many people who keep vehicles registered year after year who hardly use them at all. I used to have a small 79 Fiat convertible that I drove only about 200 miles a year. And, why should people who have, some small collector car, again, be subsidizing people who drive, 10, 15, 20 times as much per year? I think the idea of charging a carbon-based fee is one that we as libertarians should think about. It actually is one of the least burdensome taxes that I can imagine, and I hope that we will get less doctrinaire about doing that.
So if I can add to the registration aspect there, I'm disabled. I have a personal vehicle to get around, but there's really not many places to go. So like Mark was saying, I don't use it very much. That tax and the registration would make it higher for me, would it not?
I'm sorry, Tom, you kind of blanked out there. I lost some of that.
He's saying he'd be preparing more proportionally per mile if it was just a flat fee. He would be paying a greater percentage, given he doesn't drive all that much.
It's the same scenario as you were talking about with your collector car, Mark, except my car I don't use very much.
So you're suggesting that you shouldn't pay, or you should pay?
Well, if it were a flat fee for registration, right? That's what you were talking about, correct?
Well, someone has suggested a flat fee for registration.
Right, that's what I mean. That would increase the burden on me, even though I don't use my vehicle very much. So anybody who owns a vehicle that they don't use very much, for whatever reason, not just a collector car, is going to be paying more. That's often people with disabilities, people with homebodies, people who just don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah, I realize collector car is not a very sympathetic person, yeah. Tom, you make a good point. Someone in the chat has typed a suggestion that we should consider registering cars and checking their mileage every year that they're re-registered, and that is one very reasonable solution. It's a little bit more bureaucracy. I mean, right now I'm sort of like groaning that I have to do as much as I do when I re-register my vehicle. My Tesla would be able to actually report miles traveled very easily to the state. I don't know if I feel happy about the idea of my car owner, my car dealer reporting my mileage usage every year. That to me is a questionable libertarian solution, but it's a possible one. The other thing that some people have been putting in the chat is that all they're hearing is more fuel tax and more tax to subsidize battery vehicles. I think that I'm trying to say that is not what I'm suggesting. If we have a carbon tax, I believe that it should be accompanied by a rule that all existing fuel taxes must be eliminated. All the existing fuel taxes that focus exclusively on gasoline and diesel at the pump should be eliminated. So at least temporarily, I think there would actually be a reduction in the pump taxes paid by gasoline-powered automobiles, because I believe that the carbon tax should be ramped up very gradually. I think that's the most efficient way to spur investment, is to set a very well-defined curve lasting 20 or 30 years for an increase in that broad-based carbon tax.
We're kind of a little behind schedule, so we got to move on to our next segment. That's okay. That's okay. Good discussion. I'm glad we're not running out of things to say. That's good.
Sorry.
That's okay. So yeah, I wanted to move into another quick intermediate section before we get to Tom, and Jennifer has now joined us too, and Tom will introduce Jennifer. So a pet peeve I've had for several years, going to business meetings. My background, so I'm LPNY State Legislative Committee Subcommittee Chair, but I'm a mechanical engineer. I started in the HVAC and energy field back in 1985. So I've been following these kind of issues with power for some time. And one thing I'm really concerned about is a lot of buzz now about utility scale battery storage. And I would really like to see legislative action to nix that idea. So that's where I'm going, and I'll kind of start with a little history of what I've witnessed over the years. Starting again 35 years ago in the HVAC and energy type business. Back in the late 80s, and let me hide this so we don't have too much on the screen at once here. I'm managing this plus speaking. There we go. So back in the late 80s, there was a pretty aggressive rebate program throughout New York State to offer big rebates to people to install electric heating storage, typically in residential applications. And then there was also some significant ice storage or chilled water storage projects around the state too, to shift cooling loads. So the emphasis back then was load shifting. So this kind of issue has been around for a long time. Battery storage to try to match up, electrical demand with electrical production. That's the thing of late. But back then it was, okay, let's do shift changes. Let's, store heat energy at night when power demand is low and use it the next day. Same thing with chilled water and ice. So, and those technologies are still around. But that's kind of where we started some decades ago. The rebates certainly weren't a private sector only venture. They were forced upon the regulated utilities by the government, by the Public Service Commission. So it wasn't like a voluntary effort, but there was certainly a strong effort. And I can tell you that witnessing the thing, anytime you start throwing stimulus money, there's going to be more corruption and waste and prices go up. And so you'll see some bogus projects sometimes where people, do it to take advantage of the big rebate. Honestly, I almost did the same thing with my own electrically heated home back, in the late 80s, because I installed the system myself. And I got a rebate so much that I paid for my system plus bought insulation for the house and other things that had nothing to do with the electric heating system. The rebate was that big. So this has been going on for a long time. But now what's happened is in the 90s, we deregulated and separated, and this has been going on throughout the country. Power production has become a private sector affair. So all the utilities had to sell their power plants. And now we're also seeing, wind and solar and these other independent options. Even though they're subsidized, they are still, technically private. They're not regulated as strictly by the government as the distribution network. So the NYSEGs and the NIMOs and the Con Eds, they all still exist, but their purpose now is just distribution of the power. They pull it from the producers and they send it to the consumer. And that should be their only purpose. Let's keep it that way. My concern is that they want to get into storage, and storage isn't production. It isn't distribution. It isn't consumption. It's this other intermediate facet. And I think that storage, like I saw in the 80s, we tried to put it at the consumer level. Storage should be more of a free market activity. And some ideas, perhaps, have a rate of change of power production clause in contracts for wind and solar, so they can't have wide deviations in their output, which affects the grid. Then that might stimulate them to put some battery storage or flywheels or whatever works for them at the point of production. Likewise, at the end user, if the end users has big swings in demand, we have things called demand charges that are used in the commercial sector. Maybe we should do that more with residential. Encourage people to shift their power use. And tying this into the battery issue at the utility scale and the EV discussion we just had, I just did a little bit of number crunching, and there's around 4 or 5 million cars in New York State now. And if those are all to become electric, and let's say Mark mentioned earlier, a higher end car now like a Tesla is going to have about a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack in it. Let's say maybe a technology evolves where that could be dual purpose, where, when you need to make a long trip, you fill that right up and you save it for your own use to drive your long trip. But if your typical daily commute, if you're only driving 5 miles, you got this gigantic battery that can store lots of energy, and you're going to use 5% of it in your next day for your trip to and from work. Maybe, and again, I'm not saying the government should force this, but maybe the technology will evolve to where the battery in your car could be used to help, power your home. You level out the power demand in your home, buy low, sell high, charge it up at night when power is less expensive, sell it back to the utility, or use it in your home during the day when power is more expensive. So we need more real-time pricing and less regulation on that. Yeah, and just doing the math, 4 million cars, if you took half their storage of 100 kW and took 50 kilowatt hours, that works out to 200 million kilowatt hours, or 200,000 megawatt hours, and that's a big number. And I did, if I share my screen again and I look at this this other site I found. So let's say you used 50 kilowatt hours on average from your own home-based battery per day, times 30 would be 1,500 kilowatt hours per month. Well, if you look at my mouse scrolling out here, New York residents were using an average of 572 kilowatt hours a month in 2017. So
I'm sorry, Rich, we don't see your screen.
I didn't hit the share button. Sorry. Let's try again. Thanks for saying that. Again, talking and trying to operate at the same time. So it didn't. Come on. Share. There we go. So I have 572 kilowatt hours a month in 2017. And, if you use the battery at 50% of usage per day on average times 30, that's 1,500. That's almost triple what the household actually used. So if there was a car in the home, electric vehicle in the home, you're talking about a battery that's, using just a percentage of it could pretty well flatten out the power demand totally for that home. So it'd be a continuous demand on the network, or maybe you don't want to flatten it out. Maybe you want to have peaks when when the solar's putting out a lot of juice, and then idle it back when you don't have enough solar. So again, I think a market solution does a better job. So this is a call to action here. That's the name of this committee. Legislative Affairs Committee is about call to action, trying to influence legislation. I think this is a pretty urgent need, because this has been chatted about for several years, and NYSERDA's on the cusp of doing projects like this. And I'd like the legislature to say, nope. Right over the law, it says there will be no cost plus utilities that are involved in batteries. Let's keep that consumer side, producer side. The regulated utilities should be out of it.
And Rich, I threw a link into the chat there. Tesla has a Powerwall product, and a few of my clients actually have it, but they have Tesla solar panels, and the Powerwall is an add-on for their for their solar systems. But essentially, it lets you do exactly what you're describing. It lets them gather solar, use it to run whatever's running in their house. Whatever extra they're getting from the solar panel goes into the Powerwall, and then it can be used to supplement during brownout, power outage, conditions, or just to supplement the street power. So from that, in that regard, I think that's another example. And not that I hate bringing up Tesla as the continual example, but they sort of see where it's at, and I think that they're really trying to pursue, aside from the shortage of charging stations, I think they're trying to pursue a market-based solution to what right there.
Yep.
It's great, it's elegant, it's something that somebody would want to put. This home in particular is quite lovely. But they would essentially, a couple of my clients actually have these at their homes, and it's well taken. The batteries last a long time. They're able to harness the power of the sun to store energy that they wouldn't normally be able to store, and they can use it to power their home rather than run the electric meter.
Yep.
Well, I think part of the idea behind the Powerwall was a load shifting onto when the vehicles need to charge. So, the idea is, consumers would want to charge their electric vehicles using solar energy that they collect on their rooftops. The problem is most people won't have their car at home when the sun is shining. Okay. The car is at home at night. And that's when, for example, right now, my car is charging at, roughly, what is it? I can't remember right now, but it's about 32 amps at 240 volts. So anyway, it's charging at night, okay? And in order to shift that load, shift the energy that falls on the roof of a home during the daytime, you need to have battery storage in the home. So, Rich's idea of using electric vehicle batteries to store energy is interesting, but you would have to think about, trying to apply that to companies, to businesses. that have electric vehicle owners driving to work, and then see about having them use some of their energy that they stored at home at night, from their power wall, to then supply the business during the day. So businesses could, in theory, buy electricity from their employees from their electric vehicles. I think that would be the application that might work.
Yeah, that might work
most.
Yeah. I think the thing is that we got to let people need the freedom and liberty to come up with these innovative ideas. If we shackle in around a certain government mandated idea, it's going to squelch all thought for other ideas that would probably be better.
The other regulatory challenge that I can see is a safety issue. So right now, as far as I can tell, there is no way to get a large amount of energy out of my Tesla battery for an external use. I have used my Tesla battery to power sound systems during the farmers market at Cazenovia Farmers Market. We're going to try this again starting this Saturday, which is the first outdoor Cazenovia Farmers Market of the summer. And pretty much every week I have been tasked with helping to provide amplified music for the Cazenovia Farmers Market, something that I enjoy doing. My son will be performing with his band, the Sierra Sunset, in the next a week from this Saturday. It is possible to get a little bit of power out of my Tesla battery through the old-fashioned cigarette lighter jack that's in there. So I can get about 20 amps, I believe, of 12-volt power. That's about a total of only 240 watts of power that can be harvested from the Tesla battery through an existing jack. You cannot use the charging jack, the charging port at the back of the car in reverse. There's no way to get energy out of that port.
They're not designed to work.
So
this way
right now, you would have to have a significant modification in some port, some connector to the Tesla battery, and I think that could run afoul of some safety issues. There are some potentially serious safety issues because that battery, when it's driving the car, is at quite a high voltage and quite a high amperage. So if you don't have very careful regulation of the output of that battery, you could get a lot of electrocution risk.
Now that you bring that up, that used to be the big grumble of NYSEG and the other utilities back 30 years ago when wind and solar and other alternative power was coming on the market. They were always preaching about the safety. You don't hear about that as much anymore. I think the technology improved to avoid backfeed. The story was, you don't want to zap a lineman working on the lines. That fizzled out. Really, that concern kind of fizzled out. I think because the technology was developed to prevent backfeed into a dead grid. Anyway, I don't want to tie up our time too much for Tom and Jennifer. So we've gone from electric vehicles. I talked briefly about eliminating, preventing the utilities from getting into the battery storage business. I think that's a timely issue. And now we'd like to get into a local government topic, state siding boards overruling local government authority. We have Tom Queter and Jennifer Catchy. I don't know if I pronounced your last name correctly. I'd like Tom to introduce Jennifer.
I don't know how to pronounce it either.
It's Cassie.
Cassie? Okay.
Yeah.
You like C-A-S-S-I or Y?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Okay. So Tom, why don't you take it away and you can introduce Jen and you'll have this last segment.
So I'm Tom Queter, chair of the Shenango County Libertarian Party. As Rich mentioned in the beginning of the show, former candidate for Senate 52. And Jennifer Casey is petitioning for the Libertarian line to run for Guilford Town Board. If you're in Guilford, reach out, sign your petition. Now, I've got your military file right in front of me, Jennifer. I would love to read the whole thing, but it looks like you've got more medals than I have time to list on this show. And something like 29 to 30 years of experience in the military?
29.
Yep. And I see that most of your tenure is in medicine or some kind of health and environmental science. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so I was for a little over half my career an environmental science officer. And the easiest way to describe what I did was protecting soldiers from anything that could make them sick related to food, water, poop, garbage, bugs, air, basically anything that could happen apart from what the enemy was going to do to them.
So we have an interesting situation here at Guilford, and it's going on in other parts of the state. We have a windmill project coming in, which we really need to start thinking of as industrial wind turbines. These companies choose the terminology of windmill to make you think of that nice little, I believe it's Dutch cottage-looking farm windmill. But the reality here is that in Guilford, at least, they're going to be some 675 feet tall. They offer all kinds of potential hazards to the environment, which I'll let Jennifer speak to here in a few minutes. But you know what? My biggest problem with them is a few things. They were kind of forced through even before New York State got rid of the siting board. I have a friend who's on the town board as a trustee, and he didn't know about it until 6 months before they made it very public. Apparently, they had been talking about it for 2 years, but nobody knew about it except for those involved. There's a lot of disparity over soft sites, historical sites, protected sites. You know, they didn't really include Mount Upton or any of its residents in the protected soft sites, right? So that's very interesting that a single hamlet of a town is ignored and left out for the greater good, right? And you know, I'm just going to let Jennifer go with this, but my biggest problem is that it's a pilot program. And a pilot program is not like that introductory episode of a TV show where they're trying something out. They're not trying this out. A pilot program means payment in lieu of taxes. So the company gets to pay a much smaller amount right up front in exchange for no taxes. I don't know about anybody else watching, but I have never heard of anybody being allowed to do that with their own personal taxes. And these companies come from out of state or other countries. And that's ridiculous, particularly in New York, the state of our economy. They expect our taxpayers and our small businesses to fund these immense, extremely expensive and arguably detrimental and potentially failing projects to whatever end. I mean, why should the taxpayers cover something that's not going to benefit the district? That's my biggest problem. I personally believe that every pilot program should be brought to referendum. And I'm just going to hand this to Jennifer. How do you feel about it?
Oh, boy. Well, I certainly didn't think that after 29 years in the military, I was going to come to what I thought was my nice, quiet farm that I've owned for 12 years, only to find out that I would have to start fighting gigantic wind turbines. To highlight the point you made about the size of them, that is a really critical element here that's being completely overlooked, but from everyone from the town level to the state level. So we're talking about some of the largest wind turbines on the planet on land. In fact, there are very, very few others of this size on land, a few in Ireland, and I think one in the state of Texas. And the other turbines of this size are all offshore. So one of the things that the turbine companies have been doing, which is just bad science, is they've been trying to extrapolate information related to noise, infrasound, animal kill, bird kill, the impacts on local weather patterns, et cetera. And so it's just bad science. You can't just take it and say, hey, well, this 400-foot turbine did this, so the 700-foot turbine is going to do this. It doesn't work like that. But it's being accepted because the governor is pushing his green agenda. So I have to just quickly say, I think the funniest thing about clean energy is that from the moment I entered this discussion, it's dirty. Everything about it is dirty. There is no transparency. In 2016, as Tom alluded to, is when the town supervisor of Guilford started his discussions with Calpine, the company that was originally going to put these turbines up. They have now been replaced by Northland, which unfortunately is a much larger, richer Canadian company. That supervisor and Calpine discussed this project for 2 years before the town was ever informed about it. So right there, you got to wonder why. The other really vile part of that is that the town supervisor has family members who are making money off of this project, which means he should have recused himself. But because it was not, quote unquote, illegal for him to do so, he has been involved in this discussion and influencing this discussion. In fact, to the point of interfering with the 3 candidates who ran from our first group, which was called the Concerned Neighbors of Guilford, and making sure that they were not allowed to campaign openly because they had made a mistake in using the group's funds to pay for signs, which they didn't even realize was something they couldn't do. So it's just, there's been a level of just dirtiness from the beginning of it. But I know what you guys wanted to touch on here was really the state level involvement. Well, the siting board, there's so many problems with the siting board, there's not enough time for us to even talk about all of them. But what I've discovered is one of the biggest problems with the siting board process is that there are different siting boards for every project that's being proposed. Right now, there are, between projects underway, standing projects, and proposed projects, the latest number we were able to confirm was there are 51 projects proposed or underway in the state of New York. Every one of those projects is likely to have a different siting board. 5 of the 7 members of that siting board are appointed by the governor. So no matter what the town thinks or says, they're never going to be able to get the siting board to side with them because they're supporting the governor. In the case of our siting board, one of our local members actually resigned in protest and wrote a 3-page letter about how disgusting and unfair this siting board process was. But when it comes to the siting board and the fact that there's a different one for every project, I did some rough calculations this week because it looks to me like nobody at the state level, especially as it pertains to health and the environment, is looking at the cumulative impacts of these projects. So I actually wrote to the Arbor Day Society today and I said, hey, did you have any idea that if 51 projects are built across the state of New York, we're talking about cutting down upwards of 5 million trees? How much sense does that make? That's a permanent carbon sink that we're removing. And you're not going to build a whole bunch of trees, or rather plant a whole bunch of trees under the turbines. They have to have a 5-acre area around them. So, but the potential exists to cut down upwards of 5 million trees. It also exists to kill thousands of raptors, to include protected golden eagles in the Bluestone project down in Deposit, and bald eagles here in our project. So they're going one by one with these projects, and nobody is adding it all up to look at the impacts. Now, that's, of course, the environmental part of it. Nobody's doing calculations to see if the energy gained by these turbines is actually offsetting the loss of the carbon sink that we're cutting down when we put them in place. Well, these are questions we posed to the siting board. We posed questions about the impacts on the water table because they have to drill, impacts on contaminating groundwater because they have to put de-icing material on these gigantic turbines. And they're talking about putting 25 of them in Guilford. So that's a huge project. We talked about infrasound and the impact of infrasound on people who are living less than 10 kilometers away from turbines. The answer is, well, that's not a real thing. Infrasound doesn't make people sick. So to that we said, well, why did the Army study it as a weapon system? Because the Army studied infrasound for over 3 years. The only reason they threw it out as a potential weapon system is because the impact of it is very varied from person to person. So someone may react very negatively, another person may not be seriously impacted. The information about infrasound impacts is building and building and building. The more turbine projects are built around the world, the more information comes out about it. there are arguments even from Greenpeace that say, oh, there's no such thing as wind turbine syndrome. We talked to 7,000 people in Sweden and none of them have it. And well, that's because that's not what they call it. So it's really easy, just like with statistics, to twist the situation to fit your narrative. The other pieces that are at least worthy of consideration with regards to the siting board, and one specific that we believe is a violation of our constitutional rights, is that it is well known that turbine projects decrease property values anywhere from 5 to 20%. And this is around the world, not just United States data. The siting board decided they didn't have to consider that. So it doesn't matter if the people in the town of Guilford, if their property values drop 20%. This project is too important, and so we're going to go ahead with it anyway. And in fact, during the siting board meeting, the judge who was in charge of it said, the Guilford Coalition of Non-Participating Residents raised many valid concerns during the brief which they submitted. But we've basically approved these projects in the past, so we're going to approve this one too. So we don't care that the great potential exists for it to exceed the 45 decibel allowance, which, by the way, exceeds what the WHO recommends. It was as if it didn't matter when anyone said the project, they had decided before they even met that this was going to go through. And even in the Bluestone project, where 5 of the 7 people actually denied it initially, the second time that siting board met, all of 6 of the 7 approved it. So just one person stood firm. The bottom line is, there is no way for a town, even a town that doesn't support the project, there is no way for a town to stop it based on the process that the governor has put in place. And we supposedly were better off because we were under the Article 10 process. Now the ORIS process, which is in place, it literally, the town could do whatever they wanted. They could spend all their money with lawyers and fighting it, and there's no way to stop it. And the cumulative impacts are going to be really significant for the state as a whole. And nobody seems to care. Everyone is so afraid to say some green energy may not be as green as we think, or, hey, let's improve the siting process so we aren't having as much of a negative impact. There's millions of uninhabited acres in this country, but we're proposing putting wind turbines in small, underserved, low-income communities in upstate New York. It's absurd, and it reeks of targeting of communities which don't have the ability to fight against it, which basically you just have to suck it up. And anybody who thinks there aren't negative impacts needs to go on YouTube and watch videos about the town of Arkwright in New York, because if you have a heart, that video will make you cry. These people's lives have been ruined, and nobody cares. So anyway, I guess that's it in a nutshell. I don't know, Tom, if there's anything else specific you wanted me to touch on.
Well, I can add a few things. I believe they're removing some of these industrial wind turbines in Germany, or already have. I know there were 4 different projects in Pennsylvania that have been torn down after the fact because of safety.
By the way, let me jump in. For the same reasons regarding noise that we put forward to our siting board. So if you live in Pennsylvania, it's too risky for you. But if you're in New York, it's okay.
And I actually read a study of one of the projects in Ireland. They started putting them up, and as they turned them on, they had problems, and so they stopped that and tore those down. And then you were talking about the eagles, raptors in particular. There was one that was denied, and I think it was Israel, because of the same reason.
Yep. Well, and then one thing that one of the guys had brought up earlier, the whole idea of cradle to grave. There is no way at this point to recycle the biggest of the turbines. They, in fact, are burying the blades in Oklahoma because there's nothing else they can do with them.
Yep.
So,
just real quick, I see Richard Bell's comment up here. Richard is extremely knowledgeable. He's got his own solar system and everything else going on. He knows what he's talking about, and he does it himself.
Well, Thank you, Richard. I appreciate the support. But the other part of that, and in fact, Tom, you've now spoken with Curtis on the phone, but Curtis, my partner in crime, brought up to Claudia Tenney's office the representative who's supposedly there's an environmental guy who we talked to for an hour and a half who probably won't do anything for us. But Curtis said to him, "Look, you're looking at a Superfund site 20 years from now. You're basically looking at upstate New York becoming a Superfund site." Yep. Because do you think that the Shenango County landfill in Norwich, oh yeah, let's just take our old turbine there, right? And what people aren't thinking about, and the town that our town board and our supervisor don't care about, is these things are going to be falling apart. Pieces will be coming off of them. They might catch on fire or whatever, and it's the town's responsibility. The turbine company is smart about that. They're like, here, we're going to include a bond in our proposal, and so that'll cover the expense of decommissioning them. No, it won't, because there isn't any way to decommission them in the entire freaking country right now. So go ahead and put your $10,000 toward decommissioning them, and it's just a farce. So I have not given up, because I'm of Italian and Sicilian descent, or Sicilian and Irish descent, rather. You don't fight with people who are made up of Sicilians and Irishmen. So we are still fighting. And once they go up, we're going to continue fighting. We're going to have baseline sound readings done on various properties. And when they exceed them, which we know they will, then we're going to go to court and we're going to sue them. And in several places around the country, Falmouth, Massachusetts being one of those places, 10 years it took them. They finally got the turbine shut down because they went to court and sued the company. Now, it's sad that it has to come to that. And in this country, I honestly didn't believe I would spend 5 years in combat. I spent 5 years in Iraq and Afghanistan taking care of soldiers so that I could come back and live in what I equate to a communist police state. And I remained a New York voter for my 29 years in the military, despite not living here. And I can't tell you how saddened and disgusted and offended I am that I spent my entire adult life trying to protect the democracy of this country. And I come back here to a farm where I thought I would have peace. And now we're getting turbines shoved down their throat. And as an environmentalist, a self-proclaimed environmentalist, they're making such huge mistakes that are going to impact the green energy effort in the long term by making short, uninformed decisions, that it's really sad what it's going to do to the effort as a whole and the positive impact that we could have, farther down the road.
There's one other thing that I want to point out, and I think Richard Bell there was hinting at it in his comment. A lot of the windmills that have been put up already up north of New York and up west of New York, they didn't actually follow through with building the infrastructure to transmit that energy, and so they get turned off. Brand new windmills put up, turned off. You paid for them; they do nothing.
Yeah, well, and we know full well that the infrastructure doesn't exist. So we'll give all of our energy to New York City, just like we're giving them all our water. But we can't even do that. So they're putting the turbines up. They're putting the cart before the horse, because you can't get the energy. It'll go into, the supposed grid. It can't get anywhere because the grid won't support it being moved, however that works, to downstate, which, by the way, I have to say this every time I talk about this. How come nobody in New York City is being held accountable for their energy use? We keep taking it in the shorts over and over and over upstate. So people in New York City can do whatever they want, drive their SUVs, not blow up the tire, the air in their tires. I don't know. I don't get it. I think if we all were holding ourselves and each other accountable, we might not be in this predicament. But, just like the governor told his friends in Long Island, oh, they won't be closer than 30 miles to you. We'll put them 30 miles offshore. But since we have no regulatory requirements in the state, then we can put them 1,300 feet away. These things are 700 feet tall, and we're going to put them 1,300 feet away from someone's house. In probably the most vile move of the siting board, we requested that 2 of the 25 turbines be moved or not constructed because they were in such close proximity to one woman who has epilepsy, and another woman who has a child with autism. And shadow flicker is known to exacerbate these conditions or cause problems in people with these conditions. And the siting board said, it's not within our purview to discuss the siting of specific turbines.
So if I may, as a libertarian who loves numbers and economics, I have to add a couple things here. The project here in Guilford is being touted as one that will bring jobs. Well, it'll bring construction jobs for one season, and then it'll be 7 people split between 3 windmill sites. There's 3 industrial wind turbine sites. Those are the permanent jobs, 7, and they likely won't come from Guilford. And there is one other wind turbine project going on. It's not local to us, Jennifer. It's down near Suffolk County, and they are putting them out to ocean. And the problem there is they're disturbing the fisheries. They're disturbing the fish economy there, and that's largely the people who have less who work in that economy. Yeah. I mean, that's oppression of all kinds. I mean, they're going to tank that economy. They're going to damage the migration routes of many fish, as well as the ecology of the seabed.
Yeah, to your point about local jobs, the deposit project, apparently the forestry company that's going to cut all those trees down is from Pennsylvania. Because because the people in New York, the companies in New York are taxed so much, they have to charge more money, and so they aren't going to get hired to do it because it's too expensive.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I was just about to bring that up.
It's totally ridiculous. You can't make it up.
Yeah, I mean, but it is ridiculous how little foresight and actual into the details of these things that our legislature gets. I mean, how can you propose something that's such a big deal and so impactful on our communities without actually looking into it?
Yeah. And I have to say, I'm really disappointed in some. So I went to Cornell. I've been a member of the Cornell Ornithology Lab for years, and I engaged with them. And I said, hey, what do you think about this? Or the Audubon Society? What do you don't you guys care that there could be this cumulative impact on the populations of birds in the state of New York? You know, touted for bird watching in and around the Adirondacks, et cetera. I mean, it's certainly in some parts of New York income for people who are coming for ecotourism and stuff. And there has been basically no willingness to take a stand and say, let's take a closer look at this. It's cowardice in my opinion. And I think it's just one more part of this that is disgusting.
Rich, do you have anything we want to touch on?
Oh, you hit the big points. We're coming up actually a little past an hour, so I want to start winding down. We try to keep these sessions to about an hour. So closing thoughts. Maybe go to Dr. Brayman first, if you have any closing thoughts.
Oh, I hadn't thought of this. Just the overall picture that I mentioned. That to me, the biggest part of the problem that we need to deal with is the recognition that the climate concerns are mostly in this state coming from the effects are mostly going to fall on people who live downstate. I moved back upstate. I grew up in Rochester, but I have to say that any of the effects of climate change that I see happening in the next 50 years are only going to be positive. I'm in favor of global warming. I'm in favor of the climate getting warmer. I'm in favor of the climate getting wetter, which is what's been happening in upstate New York. More water to grow good crops, and it's a pleasant place to be in upstate New York with a warmer climate. So the burdens of climate change are falling on downstate. The benefits are more upstate, but the policy changes that are occurring are being done to share the costs, so that upstate bears part of the cost for ameliorating the negative effects of downstate. And we need to recognize that this is part of a long-term trend of downstate serving its own needs at the expense of upstate. I think Jennifer and Tom and we all recognize that this is a big part of the problem.
Well, that seems to be standard for this state in anything.
Yep, the political leverage. Cody, your final thoughts? You have some final thoughts, Cody?
Cliff's notes, no mandates. And that includes citing mandates from New York State. And that includes electric vehicle mandates and battery storage mandates from the state regulatory bodies. That's it.
Yep, that's the summary.
So, before I give my closing thought, I need to compliment our chair for the best frozen video feed I've ever seen. He looks extremely professional and thoughtful, which is accurate to his demeanor. But, Mark's absolutely right. Good ideas do not require force, and they certainly don't require taxes, and they certainly don't require harming our communities. We really need to look at options that are no harm policies. That's where I stand on most things.
Good. Jennifer, you have any final thoughts?
The only thing I'll say is that I retired as a colonel, and I suffered for many years because of generals who we like to call good idea fairies. And the reason that we spent millions of dollars and soldiers suffered at times is because nobody had the courage to stand up and say, you know what, sir, that's not really a very good idea. And I just think we need to continue doing that for what it's worth. We need to just keep standing up and speaking up and saying that's not a good idea. Thanks for the opportunity tonight.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. All right, I'm going to end the broadcast now. We'll continue for a couple minutes off session. Thank you, everyone, for coming.